Young farmer finds millionaire bride clinging to tree, on edge of cliff. What he does next is unthinkable. The wind howled low through the pines as the last light of day vanished behind the ridge. Jack tightened the strap on his horse's saddle, patting the animal's neck gently as it drank from the water trough beside the barn. The stars had just begun to emerge, scattered across the velvet sky above his mountainside ranch. It was peaceful, until a scream ripped through the night air. A woman's scream, sharp, desperate, close. Jack froze. "Help! Please, someone! No!" The voice was faint, but it was real. He dropped the saddlebrush and ran, his boots pounded against the dry earth as he sprinted toward the sound. The scream echoed again, clearer this time, coming from the direction of the south cliff, the sheer drop-off at the edge of his land, where the woods thinned and gave way to a deadly vertical descent. He reached the tree line, heart thudding in his chest. "Hello?" he shouted. "Where are you?" Then he heard it, not a scream this time, but a sob, and something else. A whisper of branches bending under pressure. He inched toward the edge, flashlight beam cutting through the dark, and there she was, a woman, suspended over the abyss, clinging to a narrow branch that jutted precariously from the rock face. Her white dress was torn, smeared with dirt and blood, and shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her fingers were locked around the branch, knuckles pale from the strain. Her legs dangled over nothing. Her hair was a tangled mess. Her face, what little he could see, was a portrait of terror. "Please," she choked out, barely audible. "Please don't let me fall. They tried to kill me." Jack dropped to his knees, crawling to the edge. He could see the branch bending with each of her trembling movements. It would not hold much longer. "Hey, I see you. You're going to be okay. I've got you all right. Just hold on." His voice was calm, but inside he was racing. He had no time to call for help, no time to think. She was slipping, inch by inch. He grabbed the coiled rope tied to his belt. He always kept it with him for working the fields and fences, and anchored it to a thick root nearby. Quickly he looped the other end around his waist and began easing himself down, bracing his boots against the side of the cliff. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady. "I need you to trust me. I'm going to reach you, but you've got to stay as still as you can." "I'm slipping," she cried. I can't hold." "You can," he said firmly, "just a little longer." The bark scratched at his arms as he descended. Loose pebbles crumbled beneath his feet and fell into the black void below. When he was close enough, he extended his hand. "I'm Jack," he said, reaching forward. "I've got you." Her eyes locked onto his, wide and wet with fear. "I'm Vivian," she gasped. "They thought I was dead." He reached her just as the branch made a loud, sickening crack. "Now, Vivian," he shouted. She let go, lunging toward him, and he caught her wrist just in time. Her weight dragged at him, the rope jerking hard, but he held on. Gritting his teeth, he pulled with every ounce of strength he had, inching her up the rock face toward safety. Above them, the root groaned. The rope slipped a notch. Jack bit down on panic. "Almost there," he grunted. "Don't look down." "I already did," she whispered, tears streaking her dirt-stained face. With one final pull, he got her to the top. She scrambled over the edge, collapsing onto solid ground just as the branch she had clung to snapped off and plummeted into the darkness below. The sound of it shattering against the rocks far beneath was like a gunshot. Jack pulled himself up a second later, his chest heaving. Dirt clung to his hands, blood trickled from a cut on his forearm, but he did not care. He looked at her. Vivian curled into herself, shaking, breathless, sobbing into her hands. He knelt beside her, gently placing a hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. "You're safe now." She turned to him, eyes wide and hollow. Then she threw her arms around him and cried into his chest. "They thought I was dead," she repeated, her voice breaking. Jack held her as she trembled, his eyes scanning the tree line beyond. Whatever she had escaped from, it was not over yet. But for tonight, she was alive, and he had her. Jack guided the trembling woman through the hushed, moonlit woods. The only sounds beneath the rustling trees were her labored breaths and the soft crunch of twigs underfoot. His hand remained gently at the small of her back, steady but unintrusive, ready to catch her if her knees gave out again. She was barefoot now, the shoes she once wore probably lost somewhere near the edge of that cliff. Her wedding dress dragged limply through the dirt and leaves, heavy with moisture and the weight of a night she could never erase. She stumbled once, and Jack's hand pressed slightly firmer, keeping her upright. She didn't look at him, but her shoulder leaned ever so slightly into his. That, he knew, was trust. Fragile, wordless trust. By the time they reached the modest log cabin, nestled near the ridge, the first streaks of dawn stretched across the horizon like gentle brushstrokes. The sky turned from ink to slate, then to the faintest whisper of blue. The mountains stood like silent sentinels in the distance, their outlines soft in the coming light. Jack opened the wooden door and flipped the switch near the entryway. A single lamp glowed to life, casting a warm halo across the pine-paneled walls and into the simple, lived-in space. The cabin smelled of cedar, old books, and the faintest trace of the morning's coffee, still lingering in the air. "Here," Jack said quietly, reaching for the thickest blanket he could find on the back of the couch. He handed it to her gently, not touching her skin, and guided her down to the worn leather cushions. "You're safe here." Vivian sat slowly, pulling the blanket tightly around her shoulders like a shield. Her eyes moved constantly, scanning the corners of the cabin, then flicking toward the windows. She flinched as the floorboards creaked beneath Jack's step. Her breath still came in shallow bursts, and her lips moved, but no words came. Jack knelt a few feet away, arms resting lightly on his knees. He kept his voice low, his presence grounded. "You're okay now. No one's going to find you here." Vivian didn't respond immediately. She stared out the window at the dark woods beyond, her expression guarded, haunted. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked with exhaustion. "You don't understand," she said. "They're looking for me. They always find me." Jack waited. "Who?" She hesitated, swallowing hard, then, "My name is Vivian Rothwell. My father owns Rothwell Capital, one of the largest banking institutions on the East Coast. I'm his only child, the heir to everything." Jack's brows lifted, but he didn't speak. He let her continue. "They arranged a marriage," she said, her voice losing all pretense of emotion, "to Vincent Hale. You might have heard of him. He's not just powerful, he's dangerous. Charismatic when he wants to be, but cold, controlling. He doesn't love anyone, just ownership." She curled the blanket closer around herself. "I didn't want to go through with it. I begged my parents to stop it. But to them I was just a strategic move, a way to merge empires. I didn't matter, just my name." Her voice dropped as her eyes shifted to the window. "I found out Vincent never wanted me, not really. He wanted the Rothwell name, the media, the access. I was a key to unlock more power." She took a shaky breath. "So I ran. The night before the wedding. My driver, someone I trusted, helped me escape. We drove through the night. I thought I'd made it, that I was finally free." Jack remained still, listening. "But they found me," she whispered. "Vincent's men, not regular bodyguards, professionals, ruthless. They chased us up into the mountain roads. My driver, I think they caught him. I heard him yelling, but I didn't look back." She turned to Jack then, eyes wide, haunted. "I ran until there was nowhere left to go. The edge of the cliff. I slipped. I grabbed onto that branch. I thought, maybe they'd help me up." Her voice broke, and her hands gripped the edge of the blanket. "They didn't help. They watched, and then they pushed me." Silence fell thick around them. "They wanted me gone." The words hung in the air like ice. Vivian's composure cracked. She dropped her face into her hands, and the sobs came, ragged, breathless, unstoppable. Years of fear, silence, and control shattered in a storm of grief. Jack slid to the couch, sitting beside her, not touching, just close enough to feel like support. "They failed," he said gently. "You're still here." She nodded through her tears. "I don't know how that branch held me, or how you found me." "It doesn't matter," Jack replied. "You're alive, and you're not alone." Vivian turned to him, her eyes swollen but steady. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," he said. "I know what they tried to do, and I know you didn't deserve it. But you do deserve to heal, to breathe." For a while neither spoke. The sun crept higher, spilling soft gold through the window. The woods outside stirred, birds waking, the day beginning. Inside, Vivian sat quietly, her breath evening out, her eyes no longer darting toward the shadows. The darkness was still there, but for the first time she believed there might be light beyond it, and that was the beginning. The days passed slowly, as if the forest itself had agreed to give Vivian time. She stayed hidden at Jack's cabin, her name never spoken aloud beyond those wooden walls. He did not press her for more than she could give. Instead, he offered her what he had: quiet mornings, warm meals, and a place that felt, for once, untouched by power and expectation. Vivian rarely left the cabin in those first days. At night she would jolt awake with silent screams, haunted by the sensation of falling, of the ground never coming. Her shoes stayed on, even under the covers. Her phone, now without signal or battery, was never out of reach, held like a lifeline, or maybe a weapon against the ghosts she could not see, but still feared. Jack noticed. He noticed everything, but he never pointed it out. He let her sit in silence, or help him rake leaves. He gave her space, and slowly she began to fill it. They found comfort in routine. Jack taught her how to brush the horses and feed the chickens. She showed him how to make real pancakes, not the dry ones he was used to. Sometimes they would listen to old records while sweeping the porch. Other times they simply shared a coffee in quiet. One afternoon, Vivian stood in the tiny kitchen, rolling out dough for cookies, her sleeves dusted with flour. Jack leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, watching her with a soft smile. "I haven't seen you smile like that before," he said. Vivian looked up, surprised. "Like what?" "Like you forgot what was chasing you," he replied. She hesitated, then gave a small, almost shy smile. "Maybe I did, for a moment." Jack never responded with big words, just a nod or a warm look that said everything. By the second week, she began to help him read through some financial reports from a struggling co-op Jack was trying to support. Numbers had always been her language. She marked pages with sticky notes, explaining things gently. Jack listened, learning more from her in a few hours than he had in years of mail-in workshops. One evening, just after sunset, they sat on the back porch, watching the sky turn navy blue. The sounds of crickets hummed around them. Vivian wrapped her hands around a mug of cocoa, her knees pulled up to her chest. "You ever think," she said softly, "about what you'd be if the world hadn't made you who you are?" Jack turned to her. "I think I'd still be here, with a cabin, a horse, maybe a better pair of boots." She smiled again. The peace they had built felt real, until the night it cracked. It was late, the stars were out. Jack was finishing chores in the barn while Vivian washed dishes. Then came the sound, sharp, sudden, out of place, a twig snapping just beyond the tree line. Jack froze. Vivian's head jerked toward the window. They met at the front door, eyes locked. Jack grabbed the flashlight, handed Vivian a small axe from under the stairs. Neither said a word. They moved toward the sound together, Jack slightly ahead. The flashlight cut across the ground, catching movement between the trees. Jack motioned for Vivian to stay behind him. Another sound, closer, a rustle in the leaves. Then silence. Jack swept the beam slowly. That was when he saw it. Half buried in the soil near the edge of the woods. A cigarette butt. But not just any cigarette. A custom-rolled, gold-tipped one. The exact brand Jack remembered Vivian mentioning when describing Vincent's personal security. Rare, imported, used only by his most elite men. Jack picked it up slowly, turning toward Vivian. Her face drained of color. She stepped back, her breaths shortening. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." "Vivian," Jack said gently, "we don't know that it... They found me." Her voice cracked, rising. "They were here, watching, waiting. She stumbled back toward the house, her entire body trembling. "They know I'm alive," she gasped. "They're coming." Jack caught her by the shoulders, grounding her. "Look at me," he said, firm but calm. "You're not alone. We are not going to panic. We're going to be smart. We'll get through this. Together." Vivian stared into his eyes, searching for some crack in his resolve, but there was none. Still, the fear inside her was real. She had tasted safety, just long enough to remember what it meant, and now it might be slipping away. But Jack was still standing, and, for the first time, so was she. The cabin was quiet, lit only by the flickering glow of the fireplace, but inside a storm was brewing. Jack sat across from Vivian at the kitchen table, a laptop open between them. The face on the screen belonged to Natalie Rhodes, an investigative journalist known for exposing corporate corruption, and next to her was Marcus Lang, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for taking down untouchable men. "We have one shot," Natalie said, her voice firm. "If we want to bring Vincent down, we need undeniable evidence, on tape, in his own words." Vivian nodded slowly, her fingers laced tightly together. "As the cell, we lure him out." Marcus leaned forward. "You reach out, tell him you want to come back. Tell him you regret running. Set up a meeting somewhere isolated, somewhere we control." Vivian glanced at Jack. He gave her a silent nod. A plan was set. Vivian would text Vincent from a burner phone, pleading for a private meeting. The location, an abandoned mountain lodge an hour from Jack's ranch, long forgotten by tourists and quietly rented by Marcus for the sting. On the day of the meeting, the clouds hung low over the peaks, wrapping the forest in a chill mist. Vivian wore a wire hidden beneath her clothes, the microphone resting just above her ribs, every word set to stream live to the team outside. A small earpiece let her hear Marcus, who would cue the officers waiting nearby. Jack drove her to the trailhead but stayed behind, blending into the crew as a hired hand doing repairs. In flannel and worn jeans, he looked like nothing more than a background figure, but his eyes never left the door once Vivian went inside. The lodge was dark, dusty and silent, exactly as they needed it. Vivian stood by the cracked fireplace, heart pounding. Every step had led to this moment. Then, footsteps, the heavy creak of boots on wooden floors. Vincent Hale stepped through the doorway like a man returning to claim property. He looked exactly the same, expensively dressed, confident, cold. "Vivian," he said, spreading his arms. "You finally came to your senses." She stood tall. "I wanted to talk, privately." He approached, the smirk never leaving his face. "I gave you everything, you know, a future, a name, and you threw it away because you thought love mattered more than legacy." "I didn't throw anything away," she said. "You tried to kill me." He laughed. "Kill you? Vivian, darling, please. I told them to scare you, shake you up. You're dramatic as always." She didn't flinch. "You paid men to chase me off a cliff." Vincent's voice dropped, a venomous purr. "You made it harder than it had to be. You should have just walked down the aisle. We both would have been rich, adored, untouchable. You think money makes this disappear? I think power does." He leaned in closer. "I own judges, Vivian, journalists. Your little show here? Pathetic." Vivian tilted her head. "So you admit it?" Vincent's smile twitched. "Admit what? That I saved you? That I gave you more than you ever deserved?" Vivian's heart raced. "No, that you orchestrated my fall, that you ordered my death." There was a pause, a beat too long. Vincent's mask slipped. "I cleaned up your mess," he growled. "I covered for you. I paid those men to make sure you wouldn't ruin everything. You were never supposed to survive." Vivian's breath caught. "I gave you a life," Vincent hissed, stepping forward, his voice sharp and low. "And I can take it back." He raised a hand just as Jack burst through the back entrance, fists clenched. "Get away from her!" Jack shouted. Vincent spun, surprised but not scared. "The cowboy?" he sneered. "How quaint." He lunged toward Vivian, grabbing her arm with enough force to bruise. She yelped, but the sound was drowned out by the sudden blare of sirens. Police flooded the lodge, weapons drawn. "Freeze, hands where we can see them." Vincent released Vivian instantly, trying to backpedal. Marcus rushed in, holding the recording device. "We got it all," he announced. "Every word." Vincent's eyes widened as he realized it was over. As they cuffed him, Vivian collapsed into Jack's arms, her body shaking, not from fear, but from release, from the weight finally falling away. "You did it," Jack whispered, holding her close. "No," she said, voice steady now. "We did." The days following Vincent's arrest rippled through the world like a seismic shock, leaving no corner of the media untouched. Every news outlet, from national broadcasts to late-night commentary, splashed his name across headlines in bold, unforgiving print. Vincent Hale, billionaire or beast, power lies and a wedding built on fear. Video footage of him being led out of a courthouse in cuffs looped endlessly, framed by flashing cameras and reporters shouting questions he no longer had the luxury to ignore. Social media exploded, hashtags trended overnight. For the first time, the polished image of a philanthropic mogul gave way to a much darker reality, a predator finally stripped of his illusion. And behind the fall, the quiet courage of a woman whose name remained legally sealed, but whose voice became the spark for something far greater than revenge. Vivian's story, shared anonymously, resonated across the world. More women stepped forward. Some had been his assistants, others former romantic partners, interns, or employees from companies absorbed into his empire. Their stories were nearly identical, meticulously controlled lives, threats hidden beneath smiles, rewards dangled in exchange for silence. What began as whispers became a collective roar, a reckoning. In quiet corners of coffee shops and noisy office break rooms, women who had once felt alone realized they were not, and Vivian, though she never stood at a podium or revealed her face, became the quiet symbol of what it meant to say no, thistles to survive, to rise. The Rothwell family, once proud to align themselves with Vincent's success, issued a televised apology. The patriarch stood stiffly behind a podium, flanked by executives and attorneys, and read a prepared statement. They apologized for their silence, for enabling, for the pain caused by prioritizing business over humanity. Vivian watched it once from Jack's couch, then turned the screen off. That chapter was closed. With the trial set to begin and a new legal name registered under federal protection, Vivian did something she had not done in years. She shut off her burner phone and tossed it into the fire. It hissed, sparked, then vanished into ash. She smiled as the last embers flared. Her past, for the first time, no longer hunted her. The return to the ranch was quiet, unannounced. No helicopters overhead, no reporters staked at the end of the long gravel road. Just Jack's truck pulling into the driveway, and the soft, familiar nicker of the horses waiting by the fence. The cabin stood exactly as they had left it, weather-worn but sturdy, warm from the late afternoon sun. Vivian stepped out of the truck and took a long breath of the high mountain air. She closed her eyes and exhaled, slow and deep, feeling the weight she had carried for so long finally begin to lift. This wasn't a hiding place anymore. It was home. Inside, time had stood still. The 2 coffee mugs remained on the shelf, right where she had left them, the same blanket folded neatly on the arm of the couch. The half-finished garden journal she had once filled with seed plans and sketches sat by the window, untouched since the night of the sting. Jack didn't say anything. He stood behind her, watching her rediscover the life she had paused. When she turned, he smiled, that quiet, grounding smile that had never once asked her to be anything but herself. That evening they sat together on the porch, as they had done so many times before. The sunset painted the sky in strokes of orange and rose gold, casting long shadows over the hills and turning the trees into silhouettes. Steam rose from their mugs. The air was still. Vivian watched the breeze move through the trees, soft and rhythmic, like a familiar lullaby. "I used to think freedom meant escape," she said, her voice a soft thread in the hush of dusk. "Getting away from him, from the name, from the eyes always watching." Jack didn't speak. He just looked at her. waiting. "But it's not that," she continued, turning toward him. "It's not running, it's choosing. Choosing where to live, choosing who I want to be, choosing who I want beside me." She reached for his hand, the gesture simple but full of meaning. "Freedom isn't hiding," she said. "It's choosing who I want to be. With you." Jack's fingers curled around hers. No dramatic response, just presence, strength, quiet love. Vivian leaned her head on his shoulder, her eyes fixed on the horizon, where the sun dipped slowly behind the peaks. No more fleeing, no more looking over her shoulder. She had made her choice. And in the silence, in the stillness of that golden evening, Vivian found something she had never had before, a life that was truly hers. And this gentle, grounded, fearless beginning was the moment it all truly started. The morning was clear, the kind of clear that only came after days of rain. The sky a soft, endless blue with not a single cloud in sight. The air was crisp, filled with the earthy scent of pine, and a gentle breeze rustled through the trees surrounding the ranch. Jack stood at the edge of the porch, gazing toward the forest trails behind their home, when he turned and found Vivian watching him, her coffee mug cradled in both hands. "Want to take a walk?" he asked casually, as if it was just any other morning. But his eyes held something deeper, something unspoken, but quietly certain. Vivian studied him for a moment, then smiled, slipping her hand into his without hesitation. "Lead the way," she said, softly, curious but completely content to follow. They walked together through the familiar woods, side by side, the crunch of leaves underfoot marking their pace. Vivian's steps were steady now. There was no fear in the way she moved, only wonder. She had not come back to this part of the forest since that terrifying night, the night she had clung to a thread of life on the edge of a cliff, suspended between this world and the next. But today, her heart didn't race, her breath didn't catch in panic. Today, she walked toward it. As they crested a low ridge, the trees parted, and she came to a stop, her breath hitching in her throat. The cliff, that cliff, stood just ahead, but it was no longer the same place where she had nearly lost everything. It had changed. The jagged rocks and wild brush had been cleared. In their place stood a small wooden platform, sturdy and smooth, extending just enough to offer a full view of the valley below. A rustic handrail, made from cedar and old rope, framed the edge, and wildflowers bloomed along the newly laid path. A simple wooden bench faced outward toward the horizon. Vivian took a few tentative steps forward, eyes wide. "You did this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack nodded, his tone equally soft. "I wanted to give it back to you, not as the place where it almost ended, but where it really began." Her eyes filled with tears as she stepped closer to the railing. The view stretched endlessly, rolling hills dipped in sunlight, golden fields in the distance. The wind brushing softly against her face like a long-lost friend. She closed her eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. There was no dread here now, only peace. When she turned around, Jack was standing a few steps behind her, his hands in his pockets, watching her with a quiet, steady gaze. "This was the place you chose to live," he said, his voice catching slightly with emotion. "Now, will you choose to live with me?" Vivian stood frozen for a moment, overwhelmed. Then her lips parted, and a slow, radiant smile broke across her face. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sadness, but from a joy so profound it rooted her to the earth. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small object, worn and weathered. She walked toward him and opened her palm. It was a bracelet, braided carefully from a length of rope. The rope was frayed, its fibers uneven and rough, but it was strong. Familiar. Jack's eyes widened slightly. "Is that?" "It's the rope you used to save me," she whispered, stepping even closer. "I kept a piece of it, all this time." She took his hand in hers, gently lifting his wrist. "I made this as a reminder that when everything else was falling apart, something still held." And then with hands that no longer trembled, She slipped the rope bracelet over his wrist. "I was hanging between life and death," she said, her voice thick with emotion, "and today, I choose life with you." Jack stood in stunned silence, every emotion rushing to the surface. He looked down at the rope bracelet now circling his wrist, then up at the woman before him, the woman who had once fallen and now stood stronger than ever. Without saying a word, he reached for her and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. She wrapped her arms around him tightly, and together they held each other as if the world had finally stopped spinning. The wind whispered through the trees. The valley stretched endlessly behind them. The place where it had all almost ended had become something else entirely. It was no longer the edge of a cliff. It was the beginning of forever. The field bloomed wild under a soft breeze, tall grass swaying like waves beneath the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was the kind of day where even the sky seemed to smile. Cloudless and bright, a brilliant blue canvas stretched above the earth. Butterflies flitted among the wildflowers, and bees buzzed lazily through patches of blooming clover. The scent of pine from the nearby forest mixed with the sweet, sun-warmed fragrance of blossoms, creating a kind of stillness that only nature could hold. At the edge of the meadow, where the trees stood like silent witnesses and the cliffs lay just beyond the veil of green, a simple wooden arch rose from the ground. It had been built by Jack and a few friends. Nothing extravagant, just hand-sanded beams and twine, wrapped with wild vines and white flowers that Vivian had gathered herself that morning. Beneath it, Jack stood tall, his usual stoic expression softened by the warmth in his eyes and the slight tremble in his fingers as he adjusted his collar. His suit was modest, the fabric light, perfect for the open air, but there was something timeless about the way he stood, like the earth itself had shaped him for this moment. He kept his gaze fixed on the path between the chairs, simple wooden benches borrowed from neighbors, and waited. Then he saw her. Vivian stepped into the clearing barefoot, the grass brushing gently against her legs. Her dress floated around her like mist at dawn, soft linen, the color of quiet hope. She had sewn it herself, every stitch a whisper of her journey. The lace had once belonged to her mother, handkerchiefs tucked away in a cedar chest long forgotten. The buttons came from the dress she wore the night her old life nearly ended. She'd salvaged them, polished them, and woven them into something new. Now the dress belonged to her, not to a family name or a man who tried to claim her, but to the woman who had survived. Jack's breath caught in his throat as their eyes met. Vivian smiled, a deep, radiant smile that spoke not of fairy tales or perfect endings, but of endurance, of healing, of choosing love after fear. Behind her skipped Lily, the little girl they had adopted 6 months earlier. She carried a basket filled with flower petals, which she tossed joyfully into the air, laughing as they rained down around her. Her sundress matched Vivian's, sewn from the same fabric scraps. Her curls bounced wildly with every spin, her laughter echoing across the meadow like music. The small crowd of guests rose from their seats, not hundreds, just a handful of friends, neighbors, and the few people who had stood by them through everything. There were no reporters, no camera flashes, just shared smiles and teary eyes. Vivian reached the arch and took Jack's hands in hers. Everything else faded. The wind quieted, the birds paused. The forest, the cliffs, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "Not one of us chooses where we begin," she said, her eyes locked on Jack's. "I didn't choose the chains, the fear, or the fall, but I chose to live. I chose to fight, and today I choose to begin again, with you." Jack's voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "You were never broken, just waiting to be free, and I will spend every day reminding you of that freedom." They kissed beneath the arch, slow and certain, as Lily tossed the last of her petals with a cheer. The guests clapped, some wiping tears from their eyes as a soft acoustic melody rose from a nearby speaker, carried gently on the wind. Vivian laughed as Jack swept her into a spin, her dress twirling around her legs. For the first time in years, she felt weightless, not because she had forgotten the past, but because she had claimed the future. Later, As the sun dipped below the mountains and the sky turned lavender and rose, Jack led 3 horses from the barn, one for himself, one for Vivian, and a smaller, spirited one for Lily. They mounted together, their silhouettes glowing in the twilight. They rode slowly through the forest, where light filtered through the trees in golden streaks. The path wound toward the cliffs, the very place where Vivian had once clung to life, her future hanging by a thread. Now that trail was lined with wildflowers, and where fear once lingered, there was peace. The moon rose high, casting a silver sheen across the land, and just as they reached the overlook, the horizon ahead blushed with the first golden promise of dawn. They did not stop. They rode forward, 3 hearts, 1 family, through the very place that had once marked an ending. Now it was the beginning, and the path ahead shimmered with light. As the sun rose over the edge of the world, casting light on a place once filled with fear, a new story was written, not in tragedy but in triumph. Vivian, Jack, and little Lily proved that even the darkest cliffs can lead to the brightest beginnings when love, courage, and choice come together. This was not just a story about survival, it was a story about reclaiming life, about turning pain into purpose, about choosing love not because you have to, but because you are finally free too. If this story touched your heart, made you believe in second chances, or reminded you that healing is possible, please take a moment to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories. Here, we share true and powerful tales of resilience, love, and hope. Stories that speak to the soul. Thank you for watching, and remember, no matter how far you fall, there is always a way back to the light.